In the 1940s, a massive box was loaded onto mule carts in Piedras Negras, Guatemala. They brought it to Puerto Barrios, and it was put on a ship. That ship was owned by a private American company called Standard Fruit. The ship brought the contents northward to New Orleans, bringing along with it bananas. Finally, the contents were brought north once again. In fact, not too far from where I'm standing right now, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, specifically at the Penn Museum. Now, the contents of the box were so heavy that people had to build scaffolding outside of the building in order to bring it in. So what exactly was in this box? It was a massive Maya stone monument called Stela 14. It's of the ruler Yonal Ak II from about 760 CE. And it's currently still on display in the Penn Museum. Now, a lot of archaeologists have worked to contextualize it and study it, even decipher parts of it. But what I'm more interested in is how this massive piece of Maya history came to be shipped along with bananas. And I contend that if we focus on the story of how this monument got here, it will reveal an overlooked piece of history about how American imperial and private corporate power came to dominate parts of archaeological science. So oftentimes we think of stones as being stationary, but right now I want to focus on movement. So let's recap the route of transportation. We can think of each mode of transportation as a link within a chain. And it turns out that US power was so effective in Central America in this time period that archaeologists found that they could link both governmental and private power to move archaeological objects northward. In the case of Stela 14, they relied upon private mahogany roads to move that stela to a port. They relied upon reduced transportation fare from companies like Standard Fruit and United Fruit Company. They finally also relied upon trains and trucks to carry things beyond state lines. So as we can see, archaeological sites did not just sit within vacuums of knowledge production. They sat within a nexus of transportation and labor regimes that were nearly all American funded or controlled, from the United Fruit Company railroads to the Pan American Highway that relied upon US dollars for its completion, to the United Fruit Company Great White Fleet of ships that brought materials to the United States. Finally, information transmission was almost entirely American-run, as the United Fruit Company came to dominate one of the largest telegraph networks. Even in a very brief survey of archaeological work in this time period, we can see that they overlap with two huge American imperial projects. One was governmental, the building and maintenance of the US-controlled Panama Canal Zone. The other one was private, the United Fruit Company, which at the time was the largest landholder in Central America. So why is the overlap of archaeology and US-backed industry so important? Well, because companies like the United Fruit Company owned the means of transportation, because they owned machinery and tools to carry out things like archaeological work, and because they controlled massive amounts of labor, it turns out that archaeologists tapped into all three of these in order to conduct their archaeological work. And it turns out that the tools that we use and the way that we use those tools really influence the way we both extract and the way that we read the past. So in a not so technical example, let me show you what I mean by that. Here we're looking at a cross-section of Earth. Each of those different layers is a layer of soil, which represents a particular moment in time. This is called stratigraphy. Now, if my tool of choice is a trowel, I get a very highly controlled reading of the past. I can't go into the earth too deep, but it means that I excavate slowly. And if I come upon objects that are important, I'm perhaps and hopefully less likely to break them. But if I was an archaeologist working in the 1940s, only tasked and interested in extracting monumental pieces of heritage. I could appropriate things like steam shovels or tractors from nearby sites. And this leads to a different outcome, because using this jumbles all of those layers of time. And what's more is they're more likely to break all of those small objects, just like these two marble vases from the Ulua Valley of Honduras, which, as it turns out, is exactly what happened. If I excavate using a steam shovel, I'm more likely to break things, which lead to fractures. If I don't put them back together correctly, they lead to interpretive miscalculations. Objects of these kind are simply recorded by weight and put into boxes, where some of them are never put back together again. Objects that are found in the whole and in situ, such as this, are photographed. They're drawn. They're given specific object numbers, and in some cases, their own systems of transportation. But in any case, archaeologists in this time period relied upon the United Fruit Company to bring both boxes and stone stela to the United States. And it turns out that the United Fruit Company was very well positioned to carry out this kind of work. They had long been in the business of harvesting not only fruit, but cultural heritage objects themselves. In 1910, the United Fruit Company outright bought the Maya site of Quirigua, Guatemala. And the way that their corporate goals meshed with their archaeological ones created a really interesting economic feedback loop. They claimed that by buying the site, they could protect it from the very threat of their own agriculture. Using their tractors and tools and transportation systems, they could bring objects to North American audiences, creating a certain amount of intrigue. Finally, they retrofit their own ships to bring audiences back to the land from which the objects came, creating a cycle where the fruits of labor, whether it was food or cultural heritage, occurred along the same system. What's interesting is that it's not only the tools and industries that affected the extraction of archaeological material, but sometimes the very interpretation. In one example, we can see this archaeologist here working at the site of Piedras Negras, making a hypothesis. As he observed Maya mahogany lumbermen moving those stela out from the site, he hypothesized that they were using the same fibrous ropes and techniques as their Maya ancestors did in the past. It's a conclusion that meshes essentialized notions of Maya knowledge, but with the internal capitalist logics of the mahogany camp. I hope that I have elucidated some ideas about the technology and labor involved in moving monuments of this kind. And I started with the story of a box. And I hope that this presentation has demonstrated that to get to the real history of it, we actually have to think outside of it. Thank you very much.